Thank you very much. I'm Jakub Blaimon, and I'm one of the co-founders of GroundCom. And next slide, please. So, as we know, this is the CubeSat. These days it's like a very powerful satellite, which is which can be developed and launched in a fraction of the cost of the conventional satellites in like 20 years ago. But these satellites generate a huge amount of data which needs to be transferred. Next slide, please. To download this data and control the satellites, we use these ground stations, which are antennas like this. We don't need anymore these like big buildings like to operate the satellites on lower orbit. Next slide, please. So let's say when this like a customer, which can be like a telco company, Earth observation company, or some research institute, they launch their satellite. They're usually right now buying the ground station. Usually, our team were before developing the ground stations for the teams like this in the Central Europe, and then we come up with this. We identified this problem. Next slide, please. That when the company like this buys their own ground station, they can use it only for about 1 hour a day for a typical lower orbit, polar lower orbit. And these customers, this means that they have very limited time to communicate and limited amount of the data they can download. Next slide, please. So our customers, which we were before developing the ground stations for, they shared the one ideal goal. It would be like to have the network of the ground stations, which actually is not as expensive as like a big players they are. And they can use it remotely without investing, because building such a ground station network is not only very expensive from perspective of hardware, but there is a lot of paperwork which cannot be like fast enough with just like more money or like more people on board. Next slide, please. So this is the reason why we created the GroundCom, which is a shared ground station network which is accessible online. And right now we are launching our first 3 locations. Next slide, please. And with our pilot customers, we identify like 3 revenue sources. Very usually subscription, which is usually for technology demonstration or not very data heavy missions. They pay the subscription per year of the operations, and they have a dedicated amount of the time of the connectivity time. For the missions which need more data, they can or ad hoc, like they can have a pay per minute model. But mostly with our customers, which are mostly the constellations, we have very individual conditions, but still taking advantage of the cost, and which are our one competitive advantage. Next slide, please. So right now we are finishing our first three ground station locations, and we have the private investment for it. Like I would say, it was like pre-seed. We also are incubating in the European Space Agency incubation program, and our first customers have the launch windows at the start of the next year. So it will be our pilot operations, and we already have the pipeline for another 4 customers launching in the first half of next year. And one important point would be already identified, and we extended our services licensing service, because we find out that not only the technology is the issue, and building the ground station investment, but the licensing process can sometimes take even longer than development of the whole mission. Next slide, please. So all of this cannot be, of course, not done with the great team. I have 2 other co-founders with the experience from the European Space Agency, one in the area of RF engineering, and one the experience with the software for space missions and mission control. And 4th co-founder, Tomáš, is experienced in building the business development teams around the world for high-tech companies. Of course, we have strong partners, mostly the universities, for doing the research, because even if our first ground stations are built from the commercial components, which we can buy, we already have our own improved models, like for high power amplifiers or feeds and so on. Regarding the software, we cooperate with the company HALT, which is the European company, and with the focus on the security, because it's another a big new topic. Next slide, please. Why we think it's a right timing for us is because small sat market is really booming, because the small sats and CubeSats are very, very affordable these days. And from the reports we have, in the next 9 years, 2030, they are planning like 10,000 new small sat to be launched. And only this year we have the report that, excluding the mega constellation from Starlink, there were like 350 satellites launched only this year, which are our primary customer segment. Next slide, please. Regarding the competition, we were also inspired with this, we call it like big players like Amazon Ground Services or Kongsberg Satellite Services, but we have validated and we have confirmed from our customers that these services are like too expensive for the CubeSat missions with the CubeSat budgets, I would call it. Then we also have the free service SatNOX, which is used mostly for satellites which use the radio amateur band, but we also have the first customers which actually were rejected to use the radio amateur band because it was cutting their bandwidth. So our most direct competitor is LeapSpace, is a European company. At first they started only in Europe. We started from the very first days to launch the locations around the globe to have the distribution and minimize the off time. So this is actually our competitive landscape. Next slide, please.
30-second warning.
So right now, after the pilot operations planned for start of next year, we plan to work on a seed round to ask for 3.5 million euros to actually scale our ground station network and boost our sales activities. And for 35% of this ask is used for the development, actually improve our technology and keep ahead with the low cost but very powerful technology what we have right now. Next slide. And it's so it's a summary, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the pitch. Let's start with the questions. Alan, is your hand raised up from the previous session? Do you have a question here as well?
No, sorry, I just forgot about it.
Go ahead, Tim. It's okay.
Yeah, what's your ideal customer look like? And are there enough of those ideal customers out there to support 1,000 satellites or small sats?
Yeah, actually, our original business plan, which we closed the previous investment, was to operate 250 satellites in 5 years. But then during the acceleration program we have now in San Francisco, we started to focus on the constellation customers and mostly the Earth observation customers. So right now we have in a pipeline a customer who is ready to sign the exclusivity for his bigger tens of the missions. So these are our very typical customers, and our next step is actually to identify and make sure that like customers like this, which actually one contract can be like in millions of dollars annual revenue per one customer, is so that it's not only the one. Yeah, that we would be like super lucky, and if we like make sure that there are other customers like this, what actually we already have some list they are, and then we will be ready like for this next round. So this is the like prerequisite for us that we will validate also this. Maybe I would add one other thing, that we also have the feedback, which was very important for us, as even it is not our customer from the planet, because we identified that what they decided to build their own ground station like 10 years ago, they really validated all our assumptions that the cost was the very important factor, because there were existing services for these like high budget missions, and these days they would really would like to use the service like we are. So actually we are still in contact, so maybe there will be some cooperation later, but actually they validated all our assumptions on our segment we are targeting right now.
Go ahead, Dylan, your question.
Yeah, so I guess I'm not very familiar with the technology. You have a very nice slide of comparing you with competitors. Can you share a little bit about your technology? What's the advantage you have that allows you to operate at much lower cost than like AWS or those big ones, right? They are like 10 times more expensive providing same services.
Yeah, Yeah, it was actually quite tricky when we were starting, because usually like we just were building the ground station from the off-the-shelf components. And the primary advantage before, when we were able like, to put the cost really down, was that there is a high added value only when you know how to put it together and make it working. So it was the one point. And another point is that even if we started the first ground station with the commercial components, we identified kind of the quick wins. Yeah, will be like how we can improve the technology, meaning the electronics, the SDRs, to like still like being able to scale it up to S-band and X-band, so like a higher and higher frequencies, still keeping this low cost. So for example, our cost internally like to develop and build one ground stations is about like a 30 to 40K, and the same product is like a sell for like a 150. So
Do you
yeah,
have any?
this is,
So go ahead.
so this is already like what we have as a part of our IP, what we are trying like to improve and work on, which is also part of the ask.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask. Do you have any patents regarding those technologies? Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, one last question. Samira, do you want to ask a question?
Hi, sorry, yes. I think I put it on the chat as well. I'm curious about your forecast. What are you forecasting right now for next year? And just give us some kind of idea of what are you expecting your revenue for the next 2 years? What is your acquisition plan?
Yeah, in next 2 years, actually, we are focused. We would like to, after the finish of the validation, to extend our network from 3 locations to like 10, 15, and to build very like a scalable business development process. So right now, as we are focused on these like constellations, we expect to have to operate 300 satellites like in next 2 years, and we already have the pipeline for all of this. Even like more, so like with the probability that we can reach it. But
And I
still,
guess is US and Europe the pipeline, or is it US only?
It's mostly
worldwide?
US. It's
Mostly
mostly US. Yeah, mostly US, but also some European ones.